Dr. Carla Henriquez Lazoda, International Parliament for Human Rights. Dr. Michael Powinski, lecturer, Institute of International Relations, and Mr. Michael Gervais from the International Parliament for Human Rights, co-organizers of this webinar. Chair, Ms. Louise Pine-Jones. Panelists, Ms. Poonam Taneja, Ms. Leta Taylor, Ms. Rahima Khan, Ms. Nasifa Mohammed, and Mr. Simeon Williams. Special invited guests, staff, colleagues, friends of the IAR and the University of the West Indies, students, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Anita Montut, and I am the Interim Director of the Institute of International Relations. Welcome to this event and to the Institute of International Relations. I would like to say thank you to each and every one of you who's attending here today and participating in this event. In keeping with the mandate of the Institute of International Relations, every year we host various kinds of events intended to promote free and open discussion and exchange of ideas with officials, practitioners, experts, students, and the general public on issues of relevance to international relations and national and regional development. Importantly, these public events give the IR's work a wider reach, promote its public presence, generate knowledge, and advance the policy relevance of its work. Many of these events are executed collaboratively with individuals and a wide range of organizations, including research and policy bodies, think tanks, the private sector, and national and regional governmental and non-governmental organizations. These partnerships highlight, among other things, the multidisciplinary nature of the IR's work and its ability to bridge the gap between theory, policy, and practice. On this occasion, we are pleased to collaborate with the International Parliament for Human Rights. On behalf of the IAR, special thanks and congratulations to Dr. Michael Powinski of the IAR and Mr. Michael Gervais of the Parliament of Human Rights for spearheading this initiative. I wish to express my deepest gratitude to you and the panelists for making time to share your insights on this pertinent subject. Our appreciation to others who work behind the scenes to make this event possible, including the IR Secretariat, the Marketing and Communications Departments, and many others who will be acknowledged in the vote of thanks. Finally, and importantly, to the persons who have turned up today to attend this event, thank you very much for your presence and participation. As I end, I would like to indicate that the views that will be shared in this webinar do not necessarily reflect my views, that of the University of the West Indies and the Institute of International Relations. Our role, as I mentioned at the beginning, is to host events and encourage a free and open debate on national and regional issues with a bearing on international relations. On this note, I wish you a very healthy, rich, and productive webinar. Thank you very much. I now invite Ms. Lozada to make opening remarks as she represents the partner in this event. Ms. Lozada, the floor is yours.
Thanks. My name is Carla Henriquez Lozada. I am doctor in international law and have postgrad in human rights. I working for the Parliament International for Defending Human Rights in Canada with my colleagues Michael Gervais and William and Kristen Williams in Trinidad and England and Trinidad. Nice to meet you, everybody. I pray for anything as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks. I now invite the chair to proceed and to introduce the panelists for the discussion to begin. Chair, the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us from wherever you may be this afternoon or this evening. We have a wonderful panel speaking on various issues for us today. We're going to start with Ms. Poonam Taneja, who is a senior reporter at the BBC and investigative journalist. Poonam, thank you.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you for inviting me onto this panel today. So as Louise mentioned, I'm an investigative reporter with the BBC. And in the last few years, I've produced a number of reports on Islamic State group, particularly the thousands of children who were taken there by their families to live under IS, or the children that were born there. I've reported from the camps in northeast Syria, which are run by the Syrian Democratic Forces extensively. I was first there in 2021, and more recently, I was there in November and December of last year, so just a few weeks ago. I'm also producing in co-production with CBC in Canada, a podcast which will focus on children who are currently languishing in camps in northeast Syria. In terms of the Trinidadian experience, I came to Trinidad in 2020 to produce a BBC documentary, The Calypso Caliphate. And that's when I spoke to a number of families of people who had traveled to Islamic State group. I also spoke to the family of two young boys who had been rescued from IS and had returned to Trinidad and were rebuilding their lives with their mum. So that's me. Now, in terms of the current situation with Trinidadian nationals, I was in northeast Syria, as I mentioned, in November and December. It was quite a volatile time geopolitically. There were airstrikes, there was a Turkish offensive in retaliation for the Istanbul attacks. So I think it really highlighted and underscored the the vulnerability of the region anyway. One of the first camps that I visited was Al Hol camp, which some of you will know is an IDP camp. There are about 50 to 60,000 people living there. There's a foreign section where the families of suspected IS militants are detained. It is a detention camp, effectively. No one can leave, not in the foreign section anyway. Now, there are many NGOs and charities, particularly those who work with children, for instance, Save the Children, who have made it really, really clear that those camps, or Al Hol, is not a place for children to live, but yet thousands do. They live in dangerous, unsanitary conditions. Al Hol is a dangerous camp. There've been killings there, murders, violent attacks, and of course, radicalization is a big problem. There are still women who live there or who are detained there who are committed to IS's ideology. And to give you a sense of it, that's not just something that the SDF have told me or the coalition forces have told me, but it's actually something that women within the camp have spoken to me about as well. When I was there, I asked to meet a woman there. I'm not going to reveal her name or her nationality for her own security. And she was pretty much terrified to meet me, to be seen by the other women. She was worried about the consequences of meeting a Western journalist. She was terrified about the future for her children, who were very, very young. She says that they were listening to other children there who were probably influenced by their more hardline mums. And she was really, really worried about their future. Now, there's not much for children in Al Hol to do. When I was first there in 2021, when I was driving around the foreign section, I reported on this. There were really tiny, tiny kids who were throwing rocks and stones at us. Now, I'm not going to try and analyze why. It could have been boredom. It could have been trauma. It could have just been aggression. I think one of the things that I realized when I went there first in 2021 is that the children living there have lived through unimaginable horrors. Most of them are missing at least one parent. Many of them have lost a brother or a sister, often in front of them. So I think that's the background to their current situation. As I mentioned, Save the Children, who we interviewed on many occasions, who have a very large footprint in both Al Hol and the smaller camp Al Raj, do run various programs. There's a learning facility there, but it's not a school. it's a makeshift learning facility. It just delivers the most basic education, certainly not the education that many of the children there need. I spoke also about security and danger. So a few weeks before I travelled more recently, in sort of August, September, coalition forces in conjunction with the SDF carried out a security operation. Hand grenades were found, weapons, women were found chained in their tents. So I think that provides a bit of a glimpse into just how dire security is there. Now, for a few weeks after this security sweep, murders came to a standstill. There were no murders for a few weeks. And then suddenly all that changed in November, and 2 young girls were found dead. They were found beheaded in the sewers. These were children. They were Egyptian. So I think that just illustrates again, I think the state of security there and just how dangerous the situation is there. Now, moving to Al Roj, which is, of course, where many Trinidadian nationals are currently living. I was there, as I mentioned, November and December more recently. I spoke to a number of Trinidadian children, mainly older ones. And when I mean older, I mean sort of 13, 14, 15. And speaking to them was really, really heartbreaking. That's all I can say. I think many of them have lived there since, they've lived under IS since they were 4 or 5. But they can remember another life. They all worry about their future prospects. Will they ever go home? Will they ever have a chance for a career? One young girl said to me that she really wanted to be a nurse, but she didn't really think that was ever going to be possible. And then there's another worry, of course, as well from some of the children, and that's the boys, because after adolescence, boys are separated from their mothers in the camps and they're moved on to rehabilitation centres. Now, certainly in Al Roj, I spoke to a few Trinidadian mums and their children whose sons are getting older. By older, I mean sort of 13, 14, 15 even. They're quite tall boys. They stand out in that camp because there are quite young children there. And so the concern really is that they will be moved on to rehabilitation centres like the U.W.I Centre. And that is an SDF-run rehabilitation centre for boys, for teenage boys. Now, I did travel and visit the U.W.I Centre, and I did again speak to some Trinidadian nationals there, and the boys were a bit older. Again, I'm not going to identify them. We spoke to them with permission from their mothers ahead of time. And I think their concerns were that if they stayed there any longer, there was a real risk of them being moved into a men's prison, because they were now at the age where they could be moved to a prison facility. And that is quite a scary thought for them. One of the boys was a really, really talented football player. And he said 2 things to me. The first is there any chance of him ever playing football professionally, or is it too late for him? And the other is, he asked me if anyone remembered them, or had they been completely forgotten? Because in the U.W.I Centre, there is very, very little connection with the outside world. The restriction, it's quite a disciplined facility. There are no phones. So that is really one of the things that I think really, really stands out for me. The fact that there are young boys particularly who worry that they may now just be on a conveyor belt of detention. The camps, the rehabilitation centres, and possibly then prison. Now, again, even though Al Roj is smaller, it's much more organised than Al Hol. Again, the facilities for children are really basic. It's makeshift. It's not meant for a permanent life. Some of the younger children, there are a lot of young children in Al Roj. It's the first thing that strikes you. I think about half are under 5. Half the children there are under 5. Now, to a certain extent, they look happier than the kids in Hull. but everything's relative. And the way I interpret that is just simply because they don't remember anything else, that this is their life, this is all they've ever known. But again, the restrictions and the opportunities for them are next to none. Again, it's a makeshift school. In terms of sickness, I know that I've been speaking to some women who are in Roj at the moment. There's a bug going around. I can hear lots of kids coughing and spluttering in the background. So illness, sickness is always an issue. And of course, there are children there also who have suffered some life-changing injuries. And that's also really difficult to see. You know, I've seen children there with missing limbs. I've seen children with burns, and other children who've got just behavioral issues. So I think for children, it really feels as if it's quite an urgent situation in those camps, and rehabilitation centres as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Poonam, for such a detailed description. It's absolutely harrowing, but interesting to hear what's happening and the conditions that these children are living in the camps. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Letta Taylor, who is the Associate Director of the Crisis and Conflict Division at Human Rights Watch, who's going to give us a briefing on international human rights law and global trends in repatriations. Thank you, Letta.
Thank you so much, Louise, and thank you to everyone at the Institute for International Relations and the International Parliament for Human Rights for organizing this event. It's an absolute honor to join as a panelist. Like Poonam, I've been following this detention crisis now for a number of years and have visited Al Hol and Roj camps, as well as a couple of other detention sites in northeast Syria for these foreigners. I was there most recently in May 2022, where I also had the opportunity to meet with a few Trinidadians, some of whom I'd also met in 2019. I want to just first echo everything that Poonam says about the dire circumstances that Trinidadians and other foreigners and indeed Syrians are in these camps and prisons. This crisis involves nationals from about 60 countries, and many countries have started to repatriate, including several Western ones. We at Human Rights Watch very much hope that Trinidad will be next. The point I really want to emphasize here is that what happens with these detainees in northeast Syria from 60 different countries is a global test case for human rights and the rule of law. Will countries treat their nationals who are held in these horrific conditions with the same respect and offer them the same rights that other people have? Or will they, by their inaction, create a second tier or third tier system of justice for these detainees? It is a question that I hope Trinidad will help us answer in the right way, which is to uphold the rights and rule of law for everyone, even when circumstances are this sensitive and tricky, when repatriations are challenging, because I do think they are, of course, a challenge. Human Rights Watch does believe that the only durable solution to this crisis is repatriations, rehabilitation and integration, and of course prosecutions, if warranted, if appropriate, in fair procedures. So I want to start by reading you something that a teenage boy from Trinidad told me when I met him last May at the Huri Center. Now, the Huri Center, as Poonam has noted, is locked. It's a step up from the camps in many ways. It holds teenage boys. There's a football field. There's a little bit of room to play. There's a roof over these boys' heads, but it is a detention center. It is a prison in all sense of the word. I'm going to call this boy Majid to protect his identity. He was 16 at the time I spoke to him. I think he's about 17 now. He had been at that point detained in Syria for almost 8 years, first under ISIS, then by anti-ISIS forces. This is what he told me, quote, "My father lied to me. He told me that we were going to Disneyland." That's how this boy, who I'm calling Majid, ended up going from Trinidad to Syria. Quote, "It's not my fault. It's my father's fault. I wish I never came here in Syria. I just want to go back home, you know." Under the international rights of the child, this boy, who I'm calling Majid, and all the other Trinidadian boys and girls in Northeast Syria are to be treated first and foremost as victims of armed groups, in this case, ISIS. That goes for boys and perhaps girls who may have been forced or brainwashed by ISIS or their parents into training or fighting for ISIS as so-called cubs of the caliphate. It doesn't just go for those children who involuntarily were brought to Syria. So all of these children are victims, and many of their mothers are, and possibly some of their fathers are as well. But certainly for the children, there is no dispute under international law. The rights of the child also say that children should be detained only as an exceptional measure of last resort. Yet these children, like Majid, have been detained in one way or the other since around 2014. The rights of the child also emphasize family unity. Yet many of these children, many of these boys, when they reach puberty, are taken from their mothers in the camps. And this could well be happening to Trinidadian boys as they grow older. When I spoke to Majid, he said he'd only spoken twice to his mother in Trinidad in the preceding 2 years. So much for the rights of the child to family unity. Poonam mentioned the fears of boys, that when they get a little older, they will be sent to a prison when they age out of places like the Huri Center. I spoke to one boy from Trinidad that happened to. He's now 19 and he's in a place called the Alaya prison. This is a prison for terrorism suspects who have actually been convicted of terrorism or other national security crimes. This Trinidadian youth was one of about 30 boys being held in a cell in May for 23 hours a day. The cell was barely big enough for each of these boys or young men to sleep on a mattress, to each have their own mattress to sleep on the floor. These boys, including this Trinidadian youth, told me that they had 1 hour a day, just 1 hour a day outside in a courtyard where for the previous month, they hadn't had even a football to play with. They said the courtyard was too small for them to even play all at the same time. So that's what happens to these boys as they age out of places like the Huri Center. In addition to the rights of the child, other laws are being flouted by these indefinite unlawful detentions. Under international law, all individuals have the right to life. They have a right to a nationality. They have a right to enter their own country. They have a right to freedom from arbitrary detention, that is arbitrary deprivation of liberty. They have a right to fair trials. All of these rights are being violated for the nationals of Trinidad and Tobago in Northeast Syria. The conditions are life-threatening, as Poonam mentioned. The children who were born in Syria of Trinidadian parents are essentially stateless. All of these Trinidadians lack the right to enter their own country. They don't have travel documents. They can't get out of these locked detention centers unless Trinidad tells the Northeast Syrians that it's okay to let them go. For them to reach a Trinidadian consulate on their own, they'd have to break out or pay a smuggler and make their way through a war zone to reach a border and then try to get to a consulate. The right to fair trials, this right in times of war can be suspended under certain conditions, But even in times of war, all detainees have the right to contest the necessity and legality of their detention before some kind of judicial authority. That's not happened for any of these foreigners held in Northeast Syria. We're talking more than 40,000 foreigners here, more than half of them children, and most of them very young children. So this is a system of collective punishment, which is a war crime in times of war under international law. There's also the right to be free from torture, and these Trinidadians do not have the conditions that they're in do, in my view, amount to torture. We're talking about indefinite detention in dire, life-threatening conditions. These nationals of Trinidad and Tobago have no idea when they're getting out. These children have no idea if they can become a football player, a doctor, or anything else they want to do. They know their country has abandoned them. This is tantamount to torture. Now, you may ask, well, why should Trinidad have any obligation toward these nationals? After all, the adults decided to go to Syria, and they're not in Trinidad and Tobago. So what can the country really do? What can the government do? Well, under international law, all governments actually have extraterritorial obligations toward their nationals. They have an obligation to take reasonable steps to help nationals abroad when they face serious threats to life and limb and risk of torture. This is certainly the case in Northeast Syria. Courts in Canada and Germany have upheld this obligation abroad in various ways, and so has the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, finding that both France and Finland violated the rights to life and freedom from inhuman treatment of children who they had not repatriated from Northeast Syria. They're also binding UN Security Council resolutions regarding repatriations. So I don't want to get too much more into the law. I don't want to take too much more time, but maybe just to turn also toward the rights of victims. Trinidad has a proud history of upholding international justice. It was the second country in the world to join the International Criminal Court and to make that court happen. This is an incredible history. Now, if there are Trinidadians and Tobagonians, forgive me for learning how to pronounce that, who committed crimes in Northeast Syria, they're not being punished. They're not being held to account. I'm not saying there are or there aren't. That's not for me to judge. But if there are war criminals among those held in Northeast Syria who are from Trinidad and Tobago, nobody's judging them. Trinidad has an opportunity to look into whether any of its nationals did commit serious crimes like war crimes, the crimes that it has on its own in its own books that it could prosecute these nationals for if they committed them. So it's an opportunity for Trinidad to show that it can be a world leader, both morally by repatriating its children and other nationals who are suffering, and also legally and on the international justice, in the international justice arena, by showing that it will hold anyone who might be a war criminal account if they exist. Poonam has talked about the safety concerns. Strategically, the longer these children wait, the more vulnerable they become to ISIS overtures. One thing Human Rights Watch has found in our research is that children who have been repatriated are in many cases doing remarkably well. Some are even at the top of their class. So we look forward to working with Trinidad and Tobago, should you wish for our assistance, in trying to figure out what the next steps forward could be for your fantastic country. To be a world champion on this issue and to uphold the rule of law and human rights for all, even those who ended up, sometimes by choice, but often by no choice of their own, in Northeast Syria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Letta, for that great presentation. Next, we are going to hear from Ms. Rahima Khan, who's a representative of the families in Trinidad and Tobago, nationals in Syria, and she'll be giving the perspective of the family members. Thank you. Thanks, Rahima.
Hi, Madam Chairperson, fellow panelists and viewers, a pleasant good evening. My name is Rahima Khan, and I am the representative of the families of Trinidad and Tobago nationals in Syria. My presentation tonight deals with the perspective of the family members in Trinidad and Tobago and highlights why the time is now for the immediate repatriation of our relatives in Syria. If you all will just allow me to share my screen. Hold on, sorry, just getting a little technical difficulties here. Okay, there we go. So my presentation tonight deals with the perspective of the family members in Trinidad and Tobago and highlights why the time is now for the immediate repatriation of our relatives in Syria. My mission is to encourage the government of Trinidad and Tobago to participate in facilitating the return of the women and children stuck in Syrian camps. Included in this group are my sister, nieces, and nephews. Tonight, my task is a simple one. Allow me to take you on a journey of almost 4 years in the life of a sister trying to save the life of her relatives. Since 2019, relatives in Trinidad became aware of approximately 97 nationals stuck in camps in Syria. This figure includes 25 women and 72 children. From this, there are 11 injured women and children. My sister is included in this figure, suffering from severe mental illness and requiring a hip replacement. On receiving this information, the matter was brought to the attention of the government of Trinidad and Tobago via letters and visits to their ministries, and also to the attention of the wider public. After almost a year and a half of advocating for their return, with no response from the government, except statements made to the media by the then Minister of National Security, Minister Stuart Young, who stated that they cannot verify if these are our citizens, the families had no choice but to seek redress in the courts. We were unsuccessful initially, but now all our cases are on appeal. From 2019 to now, we, the families, have realized that the government's silence on this issue and their reluctance to face this problem head-on is simply a way to frustrate us, the families who are advocating for their relatives' return. The government have instead chosen to criminalize the families here because of our advocacy, which was revealed in their latest Strategic Services Agency report that was sent to Parliament. The fact of the matter is that these citizens have not broken any Trinidadian laws, and neither is there any evidence of crimes they may have committed in Syria. At the time of their departure, there was no government advice about any threat, unlike countries like England and Canada who warned their citizens about going to Syria. Our government said nothing. And yet, collective punishment is being used on these citizens to render them stateless because of the non-issuance of their travel documents. The government wants us to believe that it is such a difficult task to repatriate these citizens, even though there is a repatriation policy that has existed since the 1960s. And it was that same policy that was used to bring home a woman and her children from Syria 6 years ago. Look at Barbados, a country much smaller than Trinidad, and yet they were able to repatriate their citizens just last month. Since 2020, we were told that to repatriate our citizens, legislation will have to be passed. Then in 2022, we were told that the government was working on a returnee bill. It's 2023 now, and yet nothing has happened. This talk of legislation was simply a delaying tactic used by this government to keep these women and children stuck in these camps for years. And what is this legislation, you might ask? Well, simply put, it criminalizes the women and children and allows the government to place them in detention when they return. It also basically wants to remove the freedom of movement, which is our constitutional right. And it basically gives the minister the right to leave our citizens locked out of our country indefinitely. The government keeps saying that there are national security concerns. That is why they need to bring legislation. But several people have already returned, and yet they have not caused any problems. What data is there to show that repatriating these citizens will actually increase our national security risk? There is no data to support the government's position that these citizens are in fact a security risk. So why the need for legislation? The inaction of this government is actually inflicting further damage on these women and children. The longer they stay there, their suffering increases. Boys who have been living in these camps for almost 4 years are reaching 12 years of age, and they are now being taken away from their mothers and imprisoned. Is it fair to these children that because of their government's inaction, their life is put to risk? There's no need for legislation because we, the families, have actually given the government an alternative remedy and asked them to come on board with us and work with us to find a solution to this problem. This solution is a civil contract, and it has been in the government's hands since 2020, and yet no attempt has been made by them to even consider it in the favor of the legislation. As you can see, our civil contract has a child-focused approach. We understand that the families here are not equipped to deal with the returnees when they come back home. They will be suffering from trauma and psychological problems that we may not be able to help them with. And we understand that we will need training to help support them. That is why this civil contract will be a tripartite agreement that involves the caregiver accepting conditions to keep her family together. It also involves the government and NGOs that will come up with a reintegration and resettlement strategy. It also involves the families here who will assist the government and NGOs with their plan. This is basically a welfare development plan for the children. It also helps to reduce the vulnerability of the women and children in society. Now let's be real. Let's face facts here. These women, when they return, they will be suffering from trauma and they would not know how to resettle into their normal lives. They will need help. Now, plans have to be put in place for these women to establish some form of income whereby they can help their families. There also has to be some plan that caters for the 14 kids that are over 15 years of age and has passed the requirement to enter secondary school. My niece will be 17 years this year. My nephew will be 15 years in 2 months' time. What becomes of them when they return and they can't enter a school? So you see, the time is now. The time to act is now. Bring these citizens home. Give these children a chance to heal and live a normal life. Give these women a chance to reset and take care of their kids and bring them up in the best possible manner. Give my nieces and nephews hope for a brighter future, and give me a chance to finally be reunited with my family and finally close this chapter in our lives. As I come to the end of my presentation, I would just like to add a powerful verse from the Quran, which states, "And whoever saves a life, it would be as if he saved the life of all mankind." I would like the government of Trinidad and Tobago to consider this verse and please save the lives of these citizens, and bring them home. I would like to thank the Institute of International Relations of the University of the West Indies and the International Parliament for Human Rights for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to thank everyone for your attention and consideration. And as I leave, please remember the time is now. Let's act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahima, for that very compelling appeal. Thank you for that. That was great. And thank you for keeping to time. We now go to Ms. Nafisa Mohammed, who is with the San Juan Muslim Ladies Association, and she'll be talking about the role of civil society in reintegration process. Nafisa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I want to say that after listening to these heart-wrenching accounts, and it really is a compelling reason to call on everyone, and more so the government, to act now. I want to say a very special good evening, Assalamu alaikum, and to all the viewers out there. I saw Carla at the beginning of these presentations, and I said to myself, here it is, over the last few years, we have been dealing with a crisis with our neighboring country, Venezuela, where there has been an influx of irregular migrants into our country. And thank God for civil society that it has been able to pick up the slack to help to deal with this humanitarian crisis. And we continue to face obstacles along the way in being able to collaborate with the government of the day, in being able to build the capacity and do what is required of us. In the case of the reintegration, or rather the repatriation, reunification, and reintegration of our citizens who have been languishing and suffering in the northeastern part of Syria in various detention facilities, it is a situation that we really, I am very grateful for this opportunity to participate in these discussions tonight, because we have to intensify our efforts and to help to overcome some of the Islamophobia that seem to have been deliberately being put out there in the public domain to cause, other persons to feel that this should not be a matter of urgency. But the government, it's time for the government to act. This is a humanitarian crisis of immense proportion. So I just want to share the screen with my presentation now. And yes. Yes, right. So as we, in my presentation, basically, I'm talking about the role of civil society in reintegration programs. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, it is located in a very strategic location between North and South America. It's the southernmost island of the Caribbean, as you can see here. And this is a map of Trinidad. And the red dots is basically an indication of some of the locations where I would call the victims, who are all citizens of our country, where the communities that they belong to. So in terms of our society, and we know that Trinidad and Tobago has been known for its diversity. It's perhaps our greatest asset, our greatest strength. And over the years, the Muslim community in Trinidad and Tobago, which is relatively small, we have had a very rich history of helping to build and develop communities and develop this country, from the days of slavery to indentureship, to colonialism, to independence, and now we are a republican state. The Muslim community has played a major role in developing this country. We estimate that there are approximately 120,000 Muslims, out of a population of nearly 1.4 million people. And whichever party is in government, there has always been that measure of support and cooperation with the government of the day. And a willingness, in this particular case, there is a tremendous willingness, as Rahima just pointed out. There is a civil contract that the relatives have already signed and indicated a willingness to work with the national authorities in order to support the repatriation, reunification, and reintegration of our displaced citizens who are in those areas in the northeastern part of Syria and somewhere in Iraq as well. And I am saying this evening that it is the duty of our government to repatriate our citizens. Now, these are some demographics in our country as it relates to the ethnic composition and as it relates to religious affiliation. And you would see it is a 2011 diagram, but sometime in 1998 as well, there were some statistics gathered that give an idea as to the population of Muslims in the Caribbean, particularly in Trinidad, Suriname, and Guyana. You will know that we have the most significant numbers as it relates to Muslims in the population. Now, in the Muslim community here in Trinidad and Tobago, just as the country, the society is very diversified along ethnic and religious lines and so. Within the Muslim community, we have a great amount of diversity as well. There are more than approximately 50 groups and organizations with the established groups over the years since 1931 coming up, being the ASJA, the Anjuman Sunnatul Jamaat Association, the Takviyatul Islamic Association, the Trinidad Muslim League, the Islamic Missionaries Guild, and we had an umbrella organization called the United Islamic Organization that was formed in the 1990s. There is the Islamic Resource Society. There are so many others, and too many to mention. As it relates to women's organizations within the Muslim community, some of the prominent ones would be within the ASJA. You have the San Juan Muslim Ladies Organization, the Islamic Ladies Social and Cultural Association, the Trinidad Muslim League, they have a ladies section as well, the San Fernando Young Muslim Women's Association, and again, there are many other women's organizations operating within the Muslim community. In the Muslim community, like so many other parts of the world, there are different sects. I myself come from a very traditional Sunni background. There are the Deobandis. The Tabligh movement has a link with the Deobandi sect. You have the Wahhabis coming out of Saudi Arabia. And perhaps in the 1990s and 2000s, you had the emergence of a very puritanical group, the Salafi movement, which also exists. They are Shiites. So there are different sects, they are different, but at the end of the day, we are all united by the belief in that fundamental pillar of Islam, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. And we do have a measure of peaceful coexistence amongst us. Now, there is no single platform for Muslim voices in the country, but as I mentioned, we have that measure of peaceful coexistence. And we have estimated that based on research that has been done within the community, that approximately 130 persons from Trinidad may have left over time from 2014 onwards until 2016 to go to that part of the Middle East. Most of the men, from our information, suggest that most of the men have in fact been killed. There might be 7 or 8 men still alive, but most of them we don't know where they are, if they are in any prisons. In terms of our repatriation efforts, there are 72 children and 25 women from the data that we have gathered, and we have information to suggest that 33 of these children were in fact children who were born there in Syria and in Iraq. Now, in terms of the duty of the government to repatriate, reunite, and reintegrate, I want to emphasize the importance of this type of participatory reintegration process. The stakeholders involved here would be the government, the relatives, civil society, the victims themselves, and of course the various human rights groups nationally and internationally. The victims, meaning those citizens of ours who are languishing in these camps, they are internally displaced persons who are in need of protection. And when I heard Ms. Letta Taylor speak just now about how well we were doing in terms of our international obligations and so, this is a time for action, a time when our government can step up to the challenge that exists and work with the various stakeholders that I just identified to help to make this repatriation a very smooth one with durable solutions in it. And I say this, we have the ability, our fundamental rights and freedoms as citizens must be respected. There are humanitarian and human rights principles that must be observed. There's a need for protection and there's a need for collaboration. And we know that for some years now, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees has been operating here in Trinidad. They have an office here. And that is the international NGO that deals mainly with refugees and internationally displaced persons. And they are present here and they can help us and help to coordinate with the national authorities, the NGOs, and the private sector to make this reintegration sustainable. Now, some of the needs from a protection point of view that exist would be to ensure a safe return, access to national documents, simple things like ID cards and passports, birth papers, marriage certificates, non-discriminatory access to services, basic medical care, social services, housing, respect for minority rights, prevention of and response to sexual and gender-based rights, and even legal assistance. Now, as we know, in our country, we have modernized our child protection laws and administrative frameworks that exist in the country. We have agencies of state that have the resources in terms of professionals who are trained in doing assessments, but also in civil society. We have many agencies and individuals and groups that are willing to participate and be involved in this process. We are of the view that even before, and I am proposing that even before the repatriation, some preliminary assessments can be done in the various locations in the communities where these victims, if they are returned, where they will be going to live. And when they do arrive, if at all there is any kind of COVID restriction or need to have any quarantine, which we are not advocating at all, but certainly there are facilities available that can be done in the shortest possible time. But we are advocating that these victims be reunited at the earliest possible opportunity with their families. And once reunited, the civil contract would have recognized that need and that willingness of the relatives to collaborate with the national authorities and with other stakeholders, civil society, and so in order to do what is required in terms of the assessments. We know that there are different types of assessments that need to be carried out. Some of these victims may need urgent medical care. If there's any high-risk case, those are matters that will have to be dealt with. We heard about the trauma of these victims, and we know that there are multidisciplinary types of assessments or psychosocial assessments, psychoeducational assessments that can be carried out. And we have the expertise available to us to do these assessments. We have a lot of NGOs, CBOs, and faith-based organizations that make up civil society here in the country. There's no one umbrella body that represents all of them. And within the Muslim community, there are many groups and individuals. Today, I had the opportunity to speak to some of these groups, and they are willing to make their services available. So based on the location of where these 25 women will have to be going to live when repatriated, I have looked at this country I looked at it from 3 points of view: from the northern areas, the central areas, and southern areas. And there are certain organizations that are readily available to assist in this reintegration process. You have the San Juan Muslim Ladies Organization. You have the Foundation for Islamic Relief, known as FIRST, Islamic Relief Support and Training, FIRST, at the Nur Islam Masjid. You have the Islamic Ladies Social and Cultural Association. You have the Anjuman Ladies. And within these groups, and there are other groups as well, there are individuals who are professionals in their own right, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, nurses, lawyers, teachers, principals, retirees, persons who are willing and able to assist. Today, I was very encouraged when I spoke to a representative of the Rashadi Foundation in the central part of the island from Monroe Road. And they are doing a lot of great works in different parts of the country. And the ability to work with children from a schooling point of view in terms of assisting, whether it is with the SEA examination, with the CSEC examinations, providing school books and supplies for their education. This foundation has a wide range of resources that is available and a willingness to assist in the reintegration of these women and children. You have as well, I spoke...
Sorry to interrupt you, but we're running out of time. So if we've got about a minute left, if you'd be able to...
just 1 minute. Let me just move on to the next slide.
Thank you.
So the desire, the aspirations are that we are looking for durable solutions in partnership with the national authorities and key actors. We know that reintegration involves these internally displaced persons, households, and communities. These are our citizens, and the national and local authorities have the primary responsibility for their welfare. However, given our unique, diverse society, we are pleading with the national authorities to establish an open dialogue and effective partnership with civil society, and let us engage in proper assessments, planning, and capacity building initiatives to effect a sustainable reintegration process. We also need to ensure there is full and appropriate participation of these internally displaced persons themselves in the decision-making, planning, and management. Trinidad and Tobago is different from the rest of the world. We are unique. We have a unique model that the rest of the world can follow. And I'm suggesting and begging to please repatriate our citizens as soon as possible. There is no need to legislate. We already have modern child protection laws and systems in place to protect women and children. These citizens are not terrorists or violent extremists. They are displaced persons who are our citizens and who need protection, support, and love from all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Nafisa, for a very detailed presentation about the role of civil society. Next, we've got Mr. Shamion Williams, who is from the Entrepreneurship Hub, who'll be talking about the role of the business sector in the reintegration programs. Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Good evening, team. Please bear with me as I share my screen. All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending and listening to us. My name is Shamir Williams. I'm from the Entrepreneurship Hub, and I'm speaking on the role of the business sector in reintegration programs. All right, so let me tell you about a program called U.W.I. I've chosen this program as my model, and it's called the Young Leaders of the Americas Initiative. And this is going to be particularly useful because I'm going to show it's pertaining to two segments within the returning groups. They are the females and the kids, the sub-adults. So the U.W.I. is a program sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, and since 2015, it's promoted. It brings young emerging entrepreneurs from the Caribbean, Latin America to the U.S. and embeds them in an entrepreneurship program. They teach them entrepreneurship, and they are embedded in a local business where they learn practically what entrepreneurship is and learn it from excellent mentors. And the goal of this program is to support and build and support networks of young entrepreneurs and social leaders across Latin America, the Caribbean, Canada, and the United States. So these individuals that went there sometimes are so inspired that some of them come back and promote entrepreneurship here in Trinidad. And together with the US Embassy, who saw an opportunity to use entrepreneurship to further promote security and stability, form the Entrepreneurship Hub. So the Entrepreneurship Hub is a non-profit organization. It's a collaborative effort with the embassy and members of the U.W.I, Young Leaders, and other US program alumni such as Fulbright and IVLP. The E-Hub seeks to create an enabling environment for entrepreneurship within Trinidad and Tobago. So in short, we meet people where they are and connect them with experts that have the best business practices globally. One of our projects is called The Basis of Photography. And this targeted persons, youths from the ages 15 to 19. And as you see a gentleman there with a camera, but it's not just about photography because we use the opportunity to teach them entrepreneurship. Now, it was really great because of the response that we got. We got a large response of youths coming to over 3 times the class size, trying to attend, showing interest. And this is our opportunity to show them that they can use this talent that they, or this interest that they have as a way to have an income and a future and turn this passion into a job. So remember, Rahima mentioned that there are over 14 kids, over 15 in the group that's the potential returnees. So this is something that could really be applicable to them. There's another project that's interesting, which is the Academy for Women Entrepreneurs. And so we are currently in our 4th cohort of this program, and or targets women entrepreneurs ages 17 to 45. It currently runs in over 480 countries worldwide, and it uses an online curriculum developed by the Arizona State University, Thunderbird School of Management, and other US partners. And it collaborates with local mentors to teach women how to become successful entrepreneurs. And it's part of our ongoing effort to empower local women to fulfill their economic potential and create conditions increase stability, security, and prosperity for all Trinidadians. And we've been running this for the last 2 years. Now, one person these projects missed was, this is an example of one of our graduates. You're looking at 2 Venezuelan nationals, and they were very glad for this program. It gave them opportunity to better themselves here in Trinidad, as well as to show that, the other women were nice to them and they could be friends with them. So a measure of integration that we saw here, as well as a good example of how we could get to these underserved segments within society. But we missed Tanya. Tanya is a returnee, or rather escapee, when we chatted. And she came back to Trinidad 6 years ago from Syria with her son and the daughter and newborn son. So we did our research and found and looked into what are the issues that persons returning from incarceration face. And we chatted with Tanya to see if they indeed were correct. So we asked her about criticism, and she said yes. From the time she came back, no one wanted to talk to her, no one wanted to be associated with her. So she was basically alone. Because of that, broken family and broken community relationships was evident. She said everything she had to do alone. She had to fend for herself and provide for her children, her family, for herself. She said she went to the MP, but did not get support. She went to counselors many times, but it just did not follow through. Because of that broken network and critique, she said she was unable to get a job for the last 6 years. Actually, just this week, she was able to get a job, and she said, Sham, don't show my face, because she just kind of concerned over what people think, the negativity that will be associated. The next issue was kind of tough to answer, but I said inferiority complex. And I described it as when people come back from after being so long away, they are deprived of the opportunities that their peers have had access to. And because of that, they feel somewhat less than where they are supposed to be, right? Or could have been. And she said, oh, Sham, perhaps that's what I'm feeling. It's not about achievement, it's about survival and catching back up. And catching back up in her mind. And she begins to talk about the trauma that she faces, not just her, but the trauma of her daughter. She can't call her too loud because she gets jumpy. She talks about her son not being able to access school for all this time. She said she's lucky she could read and write, so she could teach her son to read and write. Just this week, she got a tutor, in-house tutor for her son. So you could see evidently there's a lack of care services, especially care services targeted to them. And of course, you must have a way to integrate these subadults. So here's the solution: entrepreneurship. My definition for entrepreneurship is the exchange of talent for compensation. These individuals are not talentless. These individuals are not purposeless. They have value, and we can teach them to exchange that value for compensation. They will use that compensation to survive. Tanya, for all this time, she relied on her talent as an event planner to survive and to provide for her family. All of these individuals coming, we can teach them to do the same through entrepreneurship. So we have entrepreneurship programs targeted to these two groups. We leverage, just like before, as we have done and capable of, leverage the best practices and resources of the international and local community to connect it to these returnees. We have elements of hosting these returnees within local businesses. As Ms. Nafisa pointed out, there are many civil groups willing to assist. So we have them embedded in these communities. And through these programs, we have the elements of monitoring and evaluation. This could be done by the university or any other partner. And this way we can assess them upon arrival and throughout the program and upon exit. So to conclude, we craft 2 local entrepreneurship programs to cater specifically to the internally displaced persons or returnees from Syria. And that's my presentation, everyone. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shimon. That was very, very interesting and what sounds like a very positive solution. We're going to go into the discussion session now, but if I can actually ask all of the viewers if they have any questions to please feel free to write them in the chat and we'll discuss those shortly. But perhaps just some reflection on some of the panelists' I can ask all the panelists to come back on the screen so we can see you all. That would be great. Thank you. Thanks to everybody for those very interesting and detailed presentations. It seems like there are lots of solutions. It's, you know, there are lots of positive ideas there, from reintegration through entrepreneurship, as we just heard from Mr. Williams, to, you know, community, role of the community, to, you know, something even more structural like a civil contract, which is, you know, a wonderful idea. I'm just wondering if what the panelists think about the role of the public in the repatriation and reintegration of the individuals in Syria. Does the public opinion, I suppose, have a role to play in this? I won't point the question, but I suppose there's you know, there is an answer perhaps, or some discussion from Poonam, who could perhaps give a journalist perspective on that, or perhaps from Letta maybe as well, about civil society organisations. But what do you all think in terms of public opinion and its role in these cases, and the government responses as well, perhaps?
So I think in terms of public opinion, it's a little difficult for me to answer that question in terms of Trinidad specifically. But I suppose, of course, we know what the situation in the UK is. It's overwhelmingly negative, certainly to women and adults. We haven't, in terms of children, I think I've reported on British kids who are in the camps, and I think there's certainly a level of sympathy there. But I think it's certainly very, very clear, isn't it? I think with adults, that there is little, if any, sympathy for them. There is a real clear sense that they made a decision, they made their beds, they need to sleep in it. So I think certainly in the UK, publicly, there isn't a lot of support for returnees.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to build on that. I think that public opinion is, of course, I think the public has reasons to be wary of nationals returning. But I also think that part of the problem is that governments, and I'm not speaking specifically of Trinidad here, I'm saying that many governments around the world have fueled have fueled fear of returnees by casting all of the their nationals who've gone to Northeast Syria as time bombs, ticking time bombs, including even young children. There is this one-dimensional approach, and media, I'm not talking about Poonam at all here, who's the fantastic exception, but many media have also painted these foreigners held in Northeast Syria as all of them as being terrible security threats. This is not to say that there may not be very serious security threats and war criminals among those who are in Northeast Syria, but let's remember the vast majority are children. And many of the adults are victims of trafficking as well, or people who regretted making terrible choices. So each person needs to be judged individually. And I would contrast for example, the UK's depiction of its nationals as all being one-dimensional evil time bombs to the government of Kazakhstan, which has taken back its nationals by the plane load without incident. Now, Kazakhstan does not have the democratic freedoms of the UK or Trinidad and Tobago, so it can shape public opinion, for better or worse, in certain ways that democracies don't or shouldn't. But nevertheless, what did Kazakhstan call its repatriations? Humanitarian extractions of its nationals. It went in there to save its nationals and to help them restore their lives as citizens of Kazakhstan. This is a very, very different messaging. And I think that messaging can go a long way.
Madam Chair, if I may, because this is your public opinion, I bore the brunt of attacks by being vocal about these repatriations sometime now. Since 2020, there was a general election and the whole thing was distorted as to we are advocating to bring back all these terrorists and dump them in society. And it just stirred up a very Islamophobic position in the country. I am wishing and hoping that after all this time now, the government would see it fit to restore that kind of international stature. And I maintain that in our country, we have a model, given the makeup of our society and the relationship with civil society and the willingness to collaborate and extend a hand towards the reintegration of these citizens, that we have a model that can be replicated in other parts of the world. A lot of the condemnations you hear, it's based on a Western narrative that is unfounded. We have done research here amongst the relatives and so in terms of who went and why they went and whatnot. And what has come across is this desire, this utopian dream of going to live in an Islamic state at a time when the caliphate was being created. In the majority of instances, there was no kind of issue or question about people going there as militant extremists. You know, all these designations that have come into the discussions now, we in Trinidad and Tobago, we are basically fun-loving people. Our citizens, I have interacted with so many of the relatives, and I feel so very confident that if they are repatriated in terms of the wider society and so, there will be that embracing and that willingness to ensure that they adjust nicely amongst the citizens. It is for the government and the national authorities to lead the way and to overcome that fear or paranoia, and to be able to extend itself to recognize these are our citizens, they are victims, they need protection, not persecution. And let us treat them how internationally the obligations that we subscribe to. And let me just say this, the Convention on the Rights of the Child has been incorporated in our laws since the enactment of a package of children legislation. And in that convention, I think it's Article 12, that deals with displaced persons. So we have a duty, we have an obligation to treat with our displaced citizens, bring them back home, and let us all work together towards reuniting and reintegrating them in society. And we can do it, and we can do it in a way that the rest of the world can follow, because in our country, our society is unique. It is distinct, it is different from all over. We are so diverse, and that in itself, there is unity in our diversity.
Thank you. Thanks, Nafisa. Perhaps, Rahima, you've been working on these civil contracts. Perhaps you could give us some input on perhaps how, this public view or the narrative has impacted your work with this contract. I think you're on mute, sorry.
Concerning the civil contract, as I said in my presentation, it has been in the government's hands since 2020. We gave them that as an option, to consider when we are repatriating these women and children. We heard nothing from them. They never came to the table to talk about anything, to deal with it as that being an option. All they've been talking about is legislation. That is all that they have been putting out into the media. And it's just legislation that you need to criminalize these women and children. Now, from the family's perspective, we don't see or we don't understand why do you need to criminalize a child. We are talking about the youngest child there might be about 4 years old. The child was born in Al-Hol. Why are you going to criminalize this child? And why are you going to put this child in detention when they come here? Now, remember, they are already in detention for almost 4 years. And when they come here, you want to put them in detention again. Now, we don't agree with that. And when the government keeps talking about legislation and they are not putting out the facts of what this bill actually is, the public has no idea what this legislation is about. So they are only hearing about the government saying that they intend to do something before they can bring these people home. And their idea is to pass a law, right? They don't go into the nitty-gritty of what this law actually is. And we, the families, we are saying that we are willing to work. We are providing you with this civil contract. We will work with civil society. We will work with the government to help reintegrate and resettle these citizens back into our country. So, I just want to put the message out there that what is there to fear from a 4-year-old child, a 5-year-old child? I mean, is it fair to imprison them? I don't think so. And the government should actually consider our civil contract instead of having to pass legislation before you can bring them back, because we don't even know how long legislation will take to pass. That's just my opinion. Thanks.
May I just add, since 2020, they had draft legislation and it would require a special majority. They can't get a special majority for other basic things in the society. You think they have all that time and resources to go after 91 children and women, or 94 of them? Come on.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, thank you both. I'm going to go to Shamion, actually, just to give us a kind of his view from, building something that's, very innovative as a solution, and how he feels that, it's working really with the kind of more negative responses from the government and the public.
Well, having spoken to Tanya, right, she needs help, right? She needs help. Also speaking to a lot of civil groups, there are a lot of persons in Trinidad who want help, right? So I think the public needs to see Tanya, to see these people, to understand what they're dealing with. In the words of Tanya, she says, it's not about achievement. It's just about catching up, right? They have no time to consider being a threat. They are facing with their own traumas. Tanya said the only reason she spoke about it is because we asked her to. Otherwise, she's trying to lock away all this pain and get it behind her.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree. I think personal stories, and it's about, creating that sway of public opinion, which then obviously impacts political will and so many other things. So we've kind of come full circle, I think, there with discussion. Maybe we'll go to some of the questions from the Q&A. I'll just do them in order as they appear, and then whoever feels like coming in. I think some of them are actually for specific panelists, and I will mention that. But the first question is: are TNT children considered to be Trinbagonians, or stateless? Can the UNHCR assist with TNT children by issuing temporary travel documents? So I guess that would be probably those that are involved with the cases more closely, maybe Rahima or Nafisa.
May I just say that we have a constitutional right to our citizenship. It needs to be protected. And any attempt to strip it, to render these persons stateless, it will be a breach of our laws and international obligations. And, it is on that basis that we hope and pray that the government will see it fit to repatriate our citizens. They are our citizens, and even those who were born there, because that was the suggestion in some documents some time ago, that there was no way to verify if they are citizens of our country. But the mothers are all Trinidadians, and the state has been provided with a bundle of documents containing vital information, passport, biodata information, birth papers, and other relevant bits of information to help them to be able to verify. And even those who were born there, we understand that the Rojava, which is the administrative authority in charge of the camp, that they have an electronic database and they are able to verify through DNA testing and other forms of testing, the actual, details about whether that child would be a citizen of this country or not. Most of the fathers are deceased, but the fact is that the mothers are there.
Okay, thank you, Nafisa. Has anybody else got any input on that? Perhaps maybe Rahima or Letta about the UNHCR and the assistance with travel documents?
Well, the ICRC have said that they cannot give us temporary travel documents, that we have to get it from our government. So the only person holding back the issuance of these travel documents is the government. And I don't understand, they keep saying that we cannot verify if these are our citizens, but the families are here. We get messages from our relatives every week. We hear their voices. Obviously, we know those are our families. We are not talking to a stranger. So what's the problem with issuing these travel documents, these emergency travel documents? We have, like, for example, me, I have a letter from ICRC since 2019 that came from my sister that said she's alive and well. She was found in the camp. We sent that to the government, but still they said that doesn't verify anything. So I'm wondering, I'm kind of confused, you know, if ICRC gave us a document and I gave it to you saying, my sister is alive and in the camp, what other documentation do you need? You know, so our only option of getting help is for the government to act. They have to be willing to act. They have to issue these travel documents to them. That's the only way these women can get out of the camp. You know, so we are waiting on the government.
May I just make an analogy? Recently, we read about one of the Bajan citizens who had in fact been repatriated. And we know that several months ago, travel documents were in fact issued by that government in respect of that citizen who was there in the camp. And from the reports that we have had, it would seem that there was a very close collaboration with perhaps the US officials there or elsewhere, but that is what seemed to have enabled that repatriation to be very smooth. And in fact, the citizen was warmly received back in her home country without any of this kind of Islamophobic and paranoid reactions that we get from certain reporters here. And we wish that the government will see it fit to overcome that and work with us and let us help to bring home our citizens.
Thank you. Letta, did you have?
Yes, just to build on that, I do understand that governments want to be sure that they're bringing back the right people. And I think we need to recognize that there are people in the camps who are saying they're from a nationality A when they might actually be from nationality B. The government does have an obligation to make sure it's bringing home people who are its nationals. So I just think we need to recognize that this is not necessarily easy. On the other hand, there are many ways that this has already been done. 36 countries have repatriated some or many nationals successfully. There are a number of international and regional non-governmental organizations on the ground that stand ready to help with DNA testing and other identity verification. And this has gone very smoothly for a number of countries now. And the US, I think it's really important to recognize the role of the US government, which is something that Human Rights Watch doesn't always say. You know, we disagree with the US government all the time on a lot of things, as we do with many governments, but the US has been at the forefront of trying to help countries bring home their nationals and has helped in all sorts of logistical ways with repatriations. So I do believe that if there's a will, there is a way for NGOs and for governments such as the US and the UN, which has a repatriations committee, to step in and help countries sort out the nationality verification. It's not that difficult with DNA testing and other documents that these very, I mean, impressively, I must say, impressive civil society groups here and there in Trinidad, whereas there, of course, in this virtual world, but in Trinidad have in place. Thanks.
Yeah, Rahima, you've got your hand up, I think, there. Like to
Yes,
comment?
I just wanted to add that the families here, we are organizing a team together with our legal representative. We are actually organizing a group, a team to do the verification ourselves, and we will do it with an impartial observer. So we have even, said we'll do that. If the government is saying in 4 years' time they can't verify and they're not even making a step to go and do it, then we'll go and do it ourselves. We'll organize a team and we'll go and verify our own people and bring back the documents, bring back the pictures and show you these are Trinidadian citizens, So all this we are working on.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the update. The next question is about current events. Did the earthquake impact the camps and the TNT nationals? And this follow-up to that question is, the longer that young children stay out there, isn't it easier for them to become radicalized? Perhaps maybe Poonam has got some information about that.
So in terms of the earthquake, I know that women in the camp certainly felt something. I mean, there are no injuries and it was nowhere near the epicenter. I think in terms of radicalization and time, then that is a huge threat. It's as I said earlier, it's not just the Syrian Democratic Forces who say it, or the coalition forces. It's actually mums in the camps who say it themselves. And these are young children who are susceptible. It's not just older kids. So, young children who are 4 or 5 who come in and talk about beheadings even at that age. The fact that in Al Hol, especially, some academics call Al Hol now ISHQ, because actually in terms of the ideology of IS, it's pretty strong there. There are women who are very radical who pass that ideology onto their children, but also enforce it amongst other women as well. So absolutely, the longer they're there, the greater the risks that there are for them in terms of being susceptible and subjected to IS ideology.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else want to come in on that? There's actually a question that follows up, if nobody else has got any additional to give any updates about the earthquake. That was quite succinct. Thank you, Poonam. I think I'll go to the next question, and then I think it follows on quite well. So what's the situation is a question of men in Syria and their repatriation potential. I suppose that's it's quite a broad question, but that does connect to what you were just telling us about the latest situation, Poonam. Nafisa, I see you were ready to come in to answer that question.
Yes, in terms of the earthquake, I had gotten some feedback that in the Al Roj camp, everybody seemed to have been okay. It did not really affect that area where the camp is, which is in the northeastern part of Syria. Yes, in terms of the radicalization issue, it is precisely for that reason when you talk about de-radicalization programs and activities, a militant and military approach cannot deal with that. And that is why I'm saying in our country and our society, where the Muslim community is virtually like a homegrown Muslim community that has helped to develop this country, we have personnel, we have people within the communities who can help to treat with and to talk and to deal with these young children and women when they come back home, and to help them in terms of resettling back at home. So this fear, this phobia, this is about radicalization, and so we need to overcome that.
Okay, thank you. I think that's I mean, the second question was about the repatriation potential, perhaps, of men in Syria. Letta's got a point. I'd like to maybe ask Shimeon as well, but we'll go to Letta first.
Shimeon, why don't you go first?
Sure. What's the big difference between men and women in terms of treating them with the same care, same attention, same opportunity, right? And I mean, when from dealing with programs, what we learned is that the persons who come out from the programs are very grateful for the opportunity of being aided from the programs, right? So that there's potential there, right? As I believe someone said before, some of these persons who come from these hard situations tend to do very well and become exemplars, right? So I do think I would not discriminate against the men, right, and treat them with the same opportunity that the women could get.
Thank you. Letta?
Just to add to those really important comments, that men have rights too. Men have the same universal rights as everybody else. There is reverse gender discrimination going on against the detainees in Northeast Syria, and that all of these detainees have been painted by media, present company excluded, obviously, given Poonam's terrific work, but many media have painted this as a toxic population. And on the level of toxicity, it's as if the men are absolutely radioactive. And I think we've got to get over that. We have to look at every single person individually and consider their rights. And even if some of these men, and I'm not saying they have, but if some of these men have committed serious crimes, then they should be judged fairly, just like anybody else. They have those rights. But many men who I've interviewed who have gone to Northeast Syria say that they made terrible mistakes. They regret it. They've already been detained for several years in prison conditions that are almost impossible to imagine. It's time to bring people back for rehabilitation, reintegration, and if appropriate, prosecution, but not to leave them abandoned by their countries in unconscionable conditions. That's countries that have democracy and rule of law should be better than that. We should not stoop to the level of the extremists who think nothing of taking people's lives through decapitation and mass bombings. No, we're much better than that, most of us.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing is just consider 20 or 30 years from now, there's another threat of radicalization somewhere else in the world. Who is going to stand up and say, I've been to Syria, I've taken that beat before, and this is what happened, and this is what I advise you, young person, 30 years from now. So we have that opportunity, right?
Can I just add that from the data we gathered, if at all any of those men are alive, we believe it will be less than 10 in numbers, maybe about 7 or 8. Some of them who would have been, I think, in some detention facilities since last year in the Hezekiah detention center. I think there is, some people are unaccounted for. So their whereabouts are unknown, but it's a very minuscule number. And in any event, whatever it is, we believe we have the capacity and the resources to help in the reintegration.
Thank you. I suppose this leads to one of the questions here, which is what would be the requirements, it says actors, ways and methods specifically for the successful reintegration of TNT nationals? Any thoughts are welcome there. I can hear some ideas there that are coming in terms of sort of, reintegration into community. We've heard about Shimeon's innovative ideas. What are the kind of concrete requirements do you all think? It'd be good to hear from everybody, actually. What should be the requirements?
I think in my presentation, I pointed out that there's a need for collaboration, and it has to be a participatory process. And when these women and children, when they are returned home and reunited, they ought to be involved in terms of the programs and activities and planning for that reintegration process. That is not a 24-hour process. It can take days, weeks, months, whatever it is, an ongoing situation. But again, at the ground level in the communities, we do have the capacity for that outreach and for their involvement as the assessments are done and what their needs are. there are resources available to help in reintegrating them in a smooth and easy way. So collaboration is the key. And I want to make a point that it seems as though, you have 3 ministries that are involved in this process if they are to be repatriated. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of National Security, and the Office of the Attorney General. But there has to be a collaboration amongst them as well, because whilst dialogue may be taking place in one area, in the other area, the AG's office, they keep talking about this legislation. And there's a group of very inexperienced people who are ill-advising the Attorney General, with all due respect, because they have drafted a legislation without a policy document. There has been no study done to know the numbers, the extent. I am not aware that any of those persons have been collaborating with any of these stakeholders here who have the data and the accurate data that to help them to inform a proper policy. There's no need for legislation. Don't treat these children and women as criminals. We have an elaborate civil law system. There are civil remedies that are available. If you feel you need to monitor anybody, you can go to the court and make a child a ward of the court if necessary. There's no need for legislation. And I wish those persons in the Office of the Attorney General had been listening to or logged into this discussion, because this is the kind of forum that enables us to have a dialogue, because you are unable to meet with them and speak to them. They are inaccessible, they are unwilling, and they make you feel as though there's something that, it's such a dangerous thing, and they don't want to be involved in it. And I'm appealing to those in high offices and those in the national authorities to come and let's sit and let's talk and let's collaborate. And at the ground level, that collaboration will certainly ease the process and make it easy for everyone concerned.
Thank you, Nafisa. So collaboration as a method. Maybe I'll just go round. Perhaps Poonam, what would you say you think are the requirements, actors, ways or methods for successful reintegration?
Well, again, I think I'm going to look at the UK, where it has happened successfully. So of course there are about 450 people that returned very, very early on from Syria. They're clearly integrated perfectly or fine. We haven't heard from them. But I suppose the issue is really for the people that stayed pretty much a bit longer. But there is one case of a woman who returned with her child. Now, she was there for a very, very short period of time, Tarina Shakil. She came back. There was a sense of accountability. There was a process in terms of justice. She went through the criminal justice system. She received a sentence, and now she's rebuilding her life. I've spoken to her. She's working. She's building relationships with her children, with her child rather. And she's also now looking at how her experience can help others moving forward. So I think that there are a number of models that can be used, but I think that really, for the public as well, accountability has to be at the root of some of this.
Thank you. Rahima?
Well, I agree with Nafisa, where she said it's really a collaborative effort when it comes to reintegrating these women and children back into society. Take, for example, we brought back 2 boys about 2 or 3 years ago. Those boys have successfully resettled and reintegrated back into Trinidad society. They are going to school. They are doing well. So I believe that it is not difficult. As one of our family members, he likes to say, it's not rocket science, right? These children, with the proper care, proper love, they'll be able to heal and forget. Well, not necessarily forget, but they'll be able to heal and move on. You see, we need that family structure. We need them to be reintegrated with their families here, not to put them in some sort of detention, but when they come back, go home to their families, let them feel that love, because that is one successful way that these children can resettle into the society. Remember, I said the youngest child is about 4. That child knows nothing except about living in a camp. Nothing. They haven't seen a house, or they don't know what it's like to live in a house with 4 walls. They don't know. So when they come here, of course, it's going to take a little time because it's all new to them. But they are with their families. They are reunited with their families. The families play a major support role in reintegrating them back into society. Separating these children is going to cause harm. You can't separate them from their mothers. You can't put them in detention when they come back here. Carry them home to their families. I mean, I'll share from personal experience. When I receive a message every week or 2 weeks from my sister, my little niece, who I've never met her. She's about 7. And I have a little nephew about 5. So I've never met these kids. And when I hear their voices, she comes in and she's so eager. She wants to talk. She wants to talk. I want to talk to auntie. I want to talk to auntie. She has never seen me. She has never talked to me. But she will say, I want to talk to auntie. And she'll be like, auntie, I love you. Auntie, when are we coming home? Auntie, I love you. I miss my cousins. What does she know about cousins? She has never met them. She has never seen them. But she's like, I want to come home. When are you bringing me home? Auntie, can I come home? And it breaks your heart because I'm thinking, I've never met this child. She has never met me. But the way she talks, and she has such love, so much love in her when she talks. And it's like, auntie, I love you. And she always leaves a message at the end. Auntie, I love you. I love you, auntie. I mean, that breaks your heart every time when you hear that message. So I don't think it's rocket science. We can easily repatriate them back into society. Our community, our Muslim community in Trinidad, I mean, we're a small community, but we all work together. All these Muslim communities in Trinidad, we all work together. And it's not difficult that when they come here, they have that support. The children will have support. The adults would have support. I mean, it takes time, but we all need to work together. We need to find a solution. We can't just keep talking, and nothing gets done. We need to find a solution. And as Ms. Mohammed said, it's a collaborative effort, and the government needs to come on board with us because, as was shown in her slides, we have NGOs willing to work with us. We have psychologists, all these people willing to come on board. So it's time for the government to come on board now. The time is now for them to come on board. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Rahima. Letta or Shimayon, whoever would like to come in first, perhaps on the same question, if you've got a point. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, so from my slide and the chat with Tanya, there are known issues that these returnees will come with: criticism, unemployment, inferiority complexes. So we know what to expect, and it's for the many civil groups and supportive families to also form that program, be part of that program to help welcome and reintegrate them. Right? So that's my input there, guys.
Thank you. Letta, sorry, did you have something to add on this question?
Yes, thank you. Human Rights Watch did a study of the repatriations of children in 7 countries. I believe I mentioned it briefly earlier, and organizers had very kindly shared the link. So that provides some tips of practices that we think are quite beneficial, and also some cautionary notes about practices that we think could be improved. And family unity came up again and again and again. Unnecessary separations of children from their mothers, either children repatriated without their mothers or being separated upon return from the mother for unnecessary amounts of time. Now, there may be these instances in which mothers staying with the mother is not in the best interest of the child, but that really needs to be determined on a case-by-case basis by impartial experts in child experts, family experts, not as some blanket policy. So that's one thing I would say. Civil society participation is absolutely essential, and not just in the short term, but in the long term. The job training that Shimayon mentioned, the support networks there, absolutely. And I would say that Another thing is to prepare communities for these returns. Now, in tightly knit Muslim communities that have very active civil society groups, that may not be as much of an issue, but even there may be certain dynamics. So it's fantastic to hear Nafisa and Rahima speak about this and be aware that there's a need to consider these dynamics, and certainly working with government authorities. The word collaboration came up, and I laud that. I think this is a joint effort, and if civil society tries to do it without the government or vice versa, and without business entrepreneurs, I think, then there's less chance of success. But this has been done. It's been done successfully. There's a lot to learn from. A lot of great examples out there already.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Exactly. That was actually one of the questions, I think, examples of successful models. So I think it's more or less been answered quite a few times. And this question has also been answered, but maybe we could get a bit more detail. It came up perhaps in your presentation, Rahima. The question is, what steps have been taken to engage the government with these reintegration ideas and solutions that are presented here? So, exactly what was the process and the approach perhaps for you, Rahima, and perhaps as well, Shimeon? How can you get them on board, and how can we get, everybody involved on getting the government on board?
Well, so far, as I said, it's been almost a 4-year journey. Now, the first year and a half, we sent letters to the government, various ministries. We tried to get appointments with Minister of National Security, Minister of Community Affairs. We did all the diplomatic steps, first of all, we did that. We got Muslim organizations here, which included Ms. Mohammed. We got them to write letters to the government, to write letters to the various ministries, making them aware of what is going on. So since 2019, we did these things, sent letters, we tried to get meetings. Up to now, we are still trying to get meetings with some government ministers. Ms. Mohammed, she is trying all the time to see how we can get a meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, because we need Foreign Affairs on board to get these travel documents. But nothing is happening. We've dropped packages. The families have compiled a huge package with birth certificate, marriage certificate, photographs, passports, everything. And they've given it to the government. Look, we have everything, we have birth certificate, copies of the birth certificate, ID, everything. And we've just been hitting a wall, right? And after a year and a half, we had no other choice but to go the legal way, right? Because we tried talking to the government. They weren't listening to us. So we tried the legal way. I mean, we had several cases in courts and whatever, but all of these are the steps that we've been taking for the past 4 years. So we did the legal way. I mean, now our cases are on appeal, right? But it's even in the media. We now and then we put out stuff into the media, reminding the government, winter is coming. These women and children are living in tents, canvas tents. Please bring them home. They are starving. There's war still going on. All these things we've done, we put it out in media. And yet, all we are getting is, we cannot verify if these are our citizens. That's all we get. That's all we get. And they are not even making an attempt to come and meet us, because we have all these plans. We've given you a copy of the civil contract. We've given you the identification documents of all these people. Come on board, talk with us, the families, discuss. Let's try to find a solution. We can't just keep them in limbo, because right now they are stateless, basically. Nobody wants them. So those are the steps that we have taken so far when it came to dealing with this whole situation. And I mean, it's an ongoing effort. We've even, the latest thing was that we told them we're willing to go to Syria ourselves and verify if these are our citizens. If you all cannot do it, We'll do it ourselves. That was the latest thing we did. Let's organize a team, we'll go. But they need to communicate with us. They need to come on board with us, So that's been our journey so far.
No, thank you. Thanks for summarising that for us. Shemaine, have you had any kind of engagement with the government there in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of?
Sure. So in this regard to this case, no, right? Our connection is really through Rahima, right? And we have been brought on by them. So upon hearing from them and their pain, we naturally having the solution would offer to them, right? That's as far as my input has been. I have not been able to connect to the government.
Can I just add to this? When the High Court gave a judgment in the matter, it boiled down to a question of it being a policy matter. And based on policy, it is an executive decision that is required. If it is a decision has been taken to repatriate these citizens already, then it is certainly taking a very long time for them to show any signals or signs that they are making progress. And I accept the fact that in government, whether it is at the diplomatic end, if dialogue is taking place, that's fine. We'll welcome that kind of news. And hopefully with a conversation or discussions that we are having here tonight, I just hope and pray it will help to eliminate some of the phobia and the fears that seem to exist in certain quarters, and to help to bring all the stakeholders together, because the government alone can't do it. It has to be done in collaboration with the stakeholders, and the victims are critical stakeholders too. The families, the relatives are critical stakeholders. The civil society would be critical stakeholders. So once again, I'm making that appeal. Out of these discussions, I hope and pray that the government officials will see it fit to have some dialogue with us and let us help to fast track this process. Because I know there are people who have heart still within them in terms of being in government, and that this is a humanitarian crisis of immense proportion. And it affects our international reputation in terms of our human rights record and our international humanitarian law requirements. We need to do better than this and step up on it and repatriate our citizens.
Thank you. Thank you, Nafisa. I think Letta's got her hand up there. So in response, perhaps.
Yes, just to mention that Human Rights Watch is also, we have not met with the Trinidadian authorities on this issue, but we very much hope to. We will be coming to Trinidad just in a few weeks, actually, and launching a report on the Trinidadians and Tobagonians in Northeast Syria. And we have requested meetings with the government, and we very much hope that the government will meet with us to engage to help try to map out a path forward with civil society.
Wonderful, thank you. Maybe a final question, because statelessness came up, and I'll leave it open to whoever would like to come in on that. Sorry, no, I have to find the question. Since some of the citizens are being considered stateless, is it possible for them to be adopted, so to speak, by another country, or to obtain refugee status to be returned to another country? Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about this situation in the UK and the cases there, but perhaps we can speak either internationally or perhaps also locally as well. Who'd like to come in there? Maybe Letta.
I just mentioned from an emotional perspective, I think Rahima wants a sister, right? Yeah, that's my sentiment.
Absolutely. Thank you. Letta?
Just to say that if people face the risk of death or torture, or depending on the applicable laws, unfair trials, upon return to their homelands, they should not be involuntarily sent home. And in those cases, there should be arrangements for third country settlements, meaning people should international authorities, including the UN, should help people settle somewhere else. But really the right of a citizen is to enter his or her own country. And we very much hope that that would be the outcome for those who wish to go home, such as these children. They want to come home. So we very much hope that that's the solution, rather than looking at ways to outsource. These citizens have already been outsourced for years to a non-state entity inside one of the world's most complex war zones. So at least from our perspective at Human Rights Watch, the solution is not to outsource them yet again to another place. It is to bring them home.
Thank you. Perhaps Poonam, could give us some commentary on that?
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned, Louise, citizenship deprivation / stripping is a big thing in the UK. I believe almost every British woman in the camp has had their citizenship deprived at some point, and I know that some of them are fighting them in the courts, and some of them have won their cases as well and are still not being repatriated. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been talking about certainly are the issues for children. And I think if the messaging goes through or filters down that the countries of their birth or origin or heritage don't want them, then I think it's worth exploring, well, who does want them? And I think the alternative is not really encouraging, particularly in that region, because IS is circling. I think we saw it about a year ago, almost sort of to the month, where there was the prison break in Hasaka, simply really to break out IS members, supporters, young boys. And I think that's a real threat. So I think there's a concern over the messaging as well, that actually, well, your countries may not want them. It really falls straight into IS ideology. Your countries don't want you, but hey, we do.
Thank you, Poonam. I think we will end there. Some really wonderful input. I feel very positive actually about how solutions focused everything has been. Some kind of key words, I guess, that came up here were, in terms of those solutions, were collaboration, accountability, working together, networking, and preparing communities for repatriation and return. So a very positive spin, I think, on things. Thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to prepare and to join us for this discussion. Thank you to everybody watching. And I'm going to hand over to Yashoda Diana, who's going to give us a vote of thanks for closing. Thanks, everyone.
A pleasant good night to our chair, panelists, and everyone participating in this event. On behalf of the University of the West Indies, I would like to thank you all for being here tonight. A special thank you to Dr. Powinski and Dr. Jervis, along with the Marketing and Communications Department, for making this event possible. Thank you, Dr. Montoute, for the warm welcome, and Dr. Lozada for your opening remarks. A gracious thank you to our chair, Ms. Louise Pine-Jones, for being an amazing host, and our panelists, Ms. Poonam Taneja, Ms. Letta Taylor, Ms. Rahima Khan, Ms. Nafisa Mohammed, and Mr. Shemyon Williams for your contributions tonight. We greatly appreciate the time you have taken to enlighten and discuss with us the current situation of Trinidad and Tobago nationals in Syria and their families in Trinidad. It has been saddening to hear how truly awful this crisis has become, but look forward to a change in the situation whereas these nationals can be repatriated and reintegrated into the society of Trinidad and Tobago. Once again, thank you all for being here. I do wish you a good night or good day, depending on where you're tuning in from. Do have a good one.